Hello, welcome to Let's Talk About It. I am back with co-host Kitt Bender, but today he's not co-host Kitt Bender.
It's a little a role switcheroo, not switch, a readjustment.
Yeah, a roll flip.
Roll flip.
Let me see you do a roll flip.
Okay.
It's Raven's fun.
Okay.
Backflip.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a few episodes since you've been on, and we did an episode with Raven and talked about domestic violence, and me and her shared our stories and got like really vulnerable and really open and personal
Okay.
with all of that. And, I really wanted to like share the flip side of it and have it from like a male perspective. And I did actually get a letter from someone who did express. She said, I really enjoyed your most recent podcast with Raven discussing domestic violence. I was wondering if you'd look into having a podcast with the same topic, but from a male experience. One thing my partner and I have in common is that we both came from toxic relationships. I feel like it would be good for the audience to also know this happens to men and not just to women. How both sexes can see the warning signs for not just females, but for males as well. And I couldn't agree with her more. I think that's a great point to make, and certainly want males to be represented in this area as well.
Enter Kitt Bender.
Enter Kitt Bender. And I was sad that you weren't also on that episode with Raven, but I think it's also beneficial to give light to each one individually.
Okay.
So, partially why I wanted you to come on to talk about this is because I know you very well and you're a very dear friend. And so I know that you have a history with this kind of a thing and that you can relate to some of this. So thank you for being open to like coming and being a little bit more personal and sharing more of your personal story as a guest today.
Yeah, this isn't something that I've talked really to very many people at all about, but I think it was a very significant part of the first half of my life. I think some of the people listening are probably like, "What? not even sure what we're going to be talking about yet." So I'm like, This thing that happened that we'll figure out."
Yeah,
but.
And I think it's also. I think it can sometimes be interpreted a little bit more like to the extreme end. And I hope that no one listening is thinking that, I'm saying, or that we would be saying or implying that like the domestic violence or abuse in relationships towards women doesn't matter, because we're going to talk about how that happens with males. And, that there's kind of this sense around male mental health in general that it's like, be a man, don't talk about it.
So we're going to put the men in mental health.
There you go. There you go. You got your little fun plug.
I got it. I was really hoping I would remember to say that.
Yes. Don't think it's going to be the last time it's said.
No, unfortunately, probably for you. And fortunate for your number of eye rolls. That's what I'm...
Exactly. But I think it's also really important to like look at this from a very humanistic perspective, where, yes, we've discussed like male privilege in previous episodes, and while those things do exist, it also doesn't mean that like you can't also feel the feels. So I'd like to give some attention to that today.
To my feels? Okay. Where do we begin?
Well, I think we kind of begin with what this relationship started out as for you, and then kind of getting to like where things started to go wrong, where red flags started to come up, and the journey and process, I guess, to identifying that you were in a pretty abusive relationship.
Well, I think it started primarily for me because I was raised in a very, very conservative house where we weren't really encouraged to date a lot. It was more of the thinking was more that if you trusted the process, that at some point, for what I was told was that God would bring a wife. and then it would all work out because it would all be part of that kind of grand plan. And it did all work out, and it was all part of a grand plan, but not in a way that I would have ever expected. So when I got into college, I began dating and then eventually married. So I married effectively my first girlfriend.
At
age 23 was when we got married. We started dating when I was 20. And then we split up when I was 26. So I think a six-year relationship almost. So when I think about the warning signs and when I think about the ways that I was experiencing reality in that relationship and what I was going through, a lot of it didn't make sense, and a lot of it I didn't see until after the fact because I didn't have a lot of perspective going in. And one of the things, I don't know how deep you got into this with Raven, but one of the significant factors was that within the relationship, I was very isolated. I was isolated away from a lot of influences or people that could maybe see and then tell me some of these red flags.
And that's kind of what we call as like the blinders. And Raven gave a really good image to that of being, being a horse with the blinders on, that's like
exactly
all you really see, and that the isolation is a huge part of that. And that's like a really important key part of the cycle of domestic violence and why people do stay in abusive relationships.
I'll also just maybe say at the beginning that it wasn't abusive in the sense that I was physically abused. It was more of an emotional abuse and manipulation, that kind of thing.
And that is still abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was honestly something that I had to really come to terms with because there's, especially given that conservative upbringing and having a certain view of divorce where there are very specific guidelines and parameters as to when divorce is something that it could be considered an option. And when I got to a place where I began even considering it, there's a part of my brain and even part of my social structure that was looking for that reason. And the reasons are primarily things that are tangible. Like, are you, is one person cheating on the other person, or is there like actual physical abuse where you're in physical danger? But outside of that, there wasn't a lot of allowance for factors.
Well, I think that's typical for people, even without that conservative background, even just in everyday relationships that aren't marriage yet, that people often feel like, and I know I've dealt with this in my relationships in the past too, that like we need something specific to happen. Like there has to be like an event to explain the breakup for it to make sense. It's not just like this isn't a relationship I'm happy in anymore. Right. And oftentimes things get dragged out.
Yeah, and it definitely was dragged out, and it definitely wasn't just I'm not happy anymore. It honestly was a thing where I realized that I was never happy, and I realized it was always something that I was kind of trying to force and make happen and succeed in by sticking around despite how abusive it actually was.
That the success was just that you were married. But not what the relationship actually was. That you had the label, but that the content of the relationship wasn't important.
Absolutely. And the label was there, and the label was a thing that for social and religious and family reasons was, it was important to maintain that and kind of keep on that path. Yeah. And there was, it was a little hard to just be like, this is abusive and use that as a reason. It almost felt, maybe not to other people, but at least it felt kind of to me at first like, is this just a cop out? Is this just me not being strong enough?
Yeah. So I want to take a quick break from the show to tell you guys about Sunbasket, which honestly, I am so excited to have sponsor the pod. They are absolutely amazing. They deliver fresh, organic, really healthy meals, clean ingredients delivered right to your door for healthy home cooking, easy, convenient for any busy lifestyle, no matter how much experience you have in the kitchen. Sunbasket also offers 18 different healthy options to choose from every week, including paleo, gluten-free, lean and clean, Mediterranean, family style, and vegan. I love this feature because you can change your diet. And also when you get the package, it still comes with the rest of the recipes. So if you want to go out and get your own ingredients and make the other recipes in the book, it gives you that option as well. But honestly, the best part, Sunbasket is delivered in perfect portions with reliable nutrition information, and it's ready to whip up in about 30 minutes. There's really something for every healthy journey and every busy lifestyle. You guys have got to try this. Go to sunbasket.com/Taylor to learn more and get $35 off your first order. That's sunbasket.com/Taylor for $35 off. sunbasket.com/Taylor. Now back to the show. What do you think is another layer to that with the relationship? Because that like really sits with me, and I don't think that that's something, at least in my experience with talking with other women who have been in abusive relationships, have really expressed that. And I think maybe there is a layer of it of like, I can see this through, like I can make this a better thing, and I can wait it out kind of a thing. But I don't know if I've personally ever heard like feeling like that I wasn't strong enough to, I don't know.
Well, what I think it has to do with is our personal notion of success and what that is. And I've come lately to think of success as simply the act of fully showing up to whatever it is that you're doing and being able to be fully present with whatever that is. So the way that I would look at the factors that would contribute to, or the way that a relationship would look now, to say whether it was a success or not, are very different than what I would have thought, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
When my idea of success in relationship was, to find that person, to marry that person probably as quickly as possible, and then to never ever leave that person. It was pretty straightforward. Where a successful relationship was, and it was even told to me and by my community that success equaled length of time.
Yeah.
Within the marriage. And so like successful, they've been married 50 years, they're successful. And I got to find that wasn't necessarily true, because you can be living every day for 50 years inside of a relationship without actually being, I think, successful in it, without fully, the way I understand success, showing up and being able to be present in it. And there's, of course, a lot of factors in that, but that was the idea for me, was that I didn't want to fail in that way. Yeah. And I didn't want to prove, there was a certain amount of also manipulation where it's like, from
peers and community,
from peers. And then also from her with like, this is, God has mandated this, and it has to be, to fail this relationship. To leave it is to fail God, and is to actually go against the will of God. So it's a
whole other layer of pressure.
That's a whole other layer, which we can get into if we want. But that and my desire to please and to keep the peace, and to want to succeed, and to want to. There was another part of me that knew that she had some pretty intense family issues with a I think an abusive father on some level. If I don't fully know all, there's some things that I know happened that I don't know about, but I also know that her dad cheated on her on like 3 different wives. So there was this sense of like, are you just going to be like my dad and leave like he always did? Yeah. Almost to the place where it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I, of course, had no intention to leave, but that was...
the more that narrative was told to you and, in a way, pressured onto you,
Yes, but it in the beginning it worked. It worked in the sense that I was like, oh, I'm not going to be that. I am going to stay no matter what. And what that means for some people is a beautiful sense of safety and security where people can live out their life and be like, okay, now that I know this is set, I've got someone that's just right there by my side. For other people, it's an opportunity to get away with a lot. Like once some people realize that their partner's not going to leave, sometimes they feel okay, or at
the
least can justify.
Down.
Yeah, and some things that can be abusive, physically or emotionally, they let out because they think they have that security that you're not gonna leave.
So I want to take a quick break to talk to you guys about ModCloth. It's a fun, friendly spot for style that's as expressive and unique as you are. Inspired by amazing customers, it's ModCloth's mission to serve and celebrate the community, inspire individual style, and empower women to be the best version of themselves. ModCloth's signature label is designed by women for women. What's more, these exclusive looks come in a full-size range from extra, extra small to 4X. Got a question about fit? Their team of mod stylists can hook you up with complimentary sizing and styling help. I love ModCloth because they honestly have an amazing selection of cat-designed items, whether it's clothing or household goods. But I also totally have my eye on this pair of overalls that I plan to purchase for perhaps a little farmer's market excursion. To get 15% off your purchase of $100 or more, go to modcloth.com, modcloth.com, and enter code Taylor at checkout. Hurry, though, because this offer expires on June 29th, 2018. Once again, to get 15% off your purchase of $100 or more, go to modcloth.com, modcloth.com, and enter code Taylor at checkout. Hurry, this offer expires on June 29th, 2018. Now let's get back to the show. So what, for you, looking back, I mean, at what point in the relationship do you think that some of the emotional abuse had started? And what did that look like?
It started for me, or for us, really, really early on.
Before marriage?
Yeah. All of the realities of our relationship were all present before. And when I look back at some of the things that were even said on our first couple dates and within that first year.
Can you remember what some of those things were?
In the beginning, most of it was like this. It felt like I was being pulled into a narrative that wasn't me, if that makes sense. I was pulled
like you
in.
were being put in a box.
Yeah, I was pulled into a reality that was her reality, and it was a thing that, looking back, I see as a bunch of little tiny things, little tiny acts of manipulation, a little acting outs of insecurities that would then, ask me to do.
Projected onto you.
Be projected onto me, and then would be asked on me to, like, save me from this insecurity. Your action here will save me. And then I would start to feel that sense of responsibility.
Yeah, exactly, responsibility.
So initially, it's not as much, like the red flags have more to do with what kind of narrative are you then beginning to live, and what kind of realities
and being conditioned to live
are you being conditioned to be okay with? How far is that person able to push the boundaries, right? Before, because right at first, if they push the boundaries too far, they know that they'll scare people away. We all know that if we let all our masks down too quick, it's just whatever, not always a good look. But for some people, they'll put up a very specific mask for a long time, and then.
And you feel like she had that?
Yeah. I also, one of the biggest things that I began to realize was the incredible difference between the way we were in private and the way that we were in public. And that was one thing that, it wasn't a specific thing, but it over time, I started to see that pattern of how we could be one way and have one conversation in private, and then go to, be around one person and have a completely different conversation, and she could be a completely different person, and the reality of us was different. And then we'd go to somewhere else, it would be then completely different again. And I started to realize that there was no thing that was stable within the relationship other than whatever reality we had that was always changing depending on who we were with and depending on what we were doing and depending on what we were talking about. So it allowed me no sense of security because it was always something a little bit different. But when I began to see those inconsistencies in our relationship and also in her, it got me to thinking, like, wait a second, what is actually going on here?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're kind of like, well, wait, what does our relationship actually look like? Who am I actually in a relationship with?
And yeah, who are you? Like, what am I supposed to believe?
Yeah.
Because on one day you're one thing, and on another day you're a different thing. And that has to do with a mental condition, which we can get into later, but which I don't necessarily blame or fault her for. I'm not like pointing a finger at her because I know that so much of it is not something that she had full control over.
Yeah. Well, or even an awareness of.
An awareness of.
I think a very large part of this discussion and of, sharing your story here is that in this relationship, you were also, in relationship with someone with undiagnosed, pretty serious personality disorder from what it sounds like. And that can create a whole host of, unhealthy, toxic dynamics within the relationship. And I know that's something that we've got letters about before. And, just kind of like, how do you go about being in a relationship with someone who is struggling with their mental health, but either isn't aware of it, isn't open to getting that help? Like, how do you, maintain and support, but then also be aware of yourself? And I think that's definitely a part of, your story and our conversation as we move forward with it.
Yeah, I think awareness is a huge part of that, because what I realized at some point was that I was beginning to be aware of some of these patterns that were going on, and I was beginning to be aware of how much I was being worn down, and how much that I even like I never had actual like thoughts of suicide, like in a contemplating it way. But I have gone back and looked at like some of the songs that I wrote in that time and some of the poetry, and I could look back at that now, or I looked back at it just a couple years after, and was like, that was a song about suicide. That was a song about wondering how much more I could take. And a lot of that was because within that, I didn't feel I had words, and some of the only way, I still feel like that in a lot of life, but the only way I could communicate is to write it down and to find a way to put it into a piece of poetry or into a lyric, which sometimes don't make sense to me until later. Yeah. And I had to look back and be like, whoa, that was dark. But there was in me a growing awareness of what was going on, and a growing awareness of how much I was being beat down emotionally, and how much of my self-worth was continually being put on the line and then, ridiculed. And
ridiculed.
Yeah.
And how would you describe that? What would that look like?
That would look like me always being wrong, not necessarily wrong like I did a thing wrong that was there, but also the way of my being was considered wrong.
Sounds like being very heavily criticized.
Yes.
It's one of the horsemen of the apocalypse that Gottmans talk about. And, Yeah, that's what that sounds like.
Yeah, very critical. There was also an incredible ability to do the opposite, to compliment and to
kind of overcompensating for that criticism.
Lay on the bread and the butter of how amazing and amazing I was.
It's a bit manipulative
in a way that would pull me back. It became a very tangible. I'm going to come back to the awareness thing in just a minute, but it became a very tangible representation of the act of splitting, where things are either all good or all bad. And I began. Initially, it was more subtle. It was a little bits of good or little bits of bad, but it eventually I began to see how much of the way that I was being treated was me being either treated as you can do anything, you're amazing, on and on, whatever those are, those nice things, to you're completely deplorable and untalented, and you should probably just sell vacuum cleaners for the rest of your life or something like that. There's like get a real job because you'll never make it. And
it must have been really hard to deal with and to hear.
It was, but over time, what I found was my awareness began to increase, and my separation from the situation, which partially had to do with numbness. I'd numbed myself so much, not through drugs or alcohol. I was completely clean and sober there, but my emotions were numbed to a point where I could hear all that and just be like, okay. But then that also meant all the compliments were like, okay. And I literally stopped being able to believe anything. So what I noticed was, as my awareness was increasing, I also noticed that her awareness wasn't increasing in the same way. And so she was never fully self-aware of the reality of what was going on, despite a number of opportunities, both from a couple different counselors, and just reality of when you get in a situation with someone who's very discerning, who can say something very poignant, and it's true and correct, and then this happened where someone was very, very, very wisely got a couple layers deep into her psyche and basically spelled out what was going on.
And what was that?
It was a really, really interesting conversation, actually. I was at a piano bar, and the guy that was playing has been playing at this place for, now it'd be 30 years if he's still there, 30, 40 years. A really fantastic piano player and vocalist who was also blind. And so he performed, and he had actually a full recording studio that he operated blind with this computer that would talk to him at like 10 times the speed of sound. But he was an incredibly intuitive individual. And we got done with the show, and it was one of those cool pianos that you can like sit around. It's at a bar. And he was sitting there drinking his red wine, as he always had a red wine at the end of the show. And then she was sitting to his left, and I was sitting 2 people over. And he could just do this thing where he would just hold a person's hand or touch them in some way. And he was just holding her hand. And then at one point he looked over at me and he said, "You're afraid of her. Why are you afraid of her?" And I was like, well, I'm not, I know this guy well enough to know that I am getting nothing past him. Nothing.
You're like, there's no denying this or acting like I don't know what he's talking about.
And I'd known him for years at that point, and mostly through other people. And we actually got closer afterwards. I did some recording with him and some performing with him, and he's awesome. But I was just was like, yeah, because, and I don't remember the details of the conversation, but I know that it got to that level when I was like, yeah, this is the reality of it. This is the way I feel about this and that. And then he was just very, in a way that he could do, got straight to the heart of her. And we left that with her just curled up in the backseat of the car, just like overwhelmed with the reality of that. Maybe not even, I don't know whether that was a discovery or just a level of awareness of blinders coming off of her, or I don't know what it was. What did he say to her?
Or what did he point out?
It was, honestly, it was so long ago, I don't want to try to put words in his mouth, but it had to do with the way that she saw the world and the way she treated people as a result of it. And I remember asking her at the end of that night, because I knew I had a feeling it was going to change. I asked her how much of what he said was right. And she said, all of it. And then the next day, had nothing but horrible, awful things to say about him and how he was a fraud and how he was mean and was trying to hurt her.
Well, now they're trying to protect herself.
It was trying to protect herself. But that's why I asked the night before, while she was still kind of in that vulnerable place. For me, I wanted to know: was this right? Was he as right on the as right on the money as it sounded like he was? And she said yes. And then the next day, everything changed. But what I saw moving forward was this increasing awareness that I had, and an increasing. Despite those kinds of opportunities. And like I said, other things from a premarital counselor and then a marital counselor and then a pastor friend of ours, where she was given opportunities to look at herself and to take some responsibility for the way that she was not just treating me, really everybody around her, and then kind of refused to take any kind of actual...
Wasn't ready, couldn't do it.
Chose
not to.
Because you have to believe a reality about yourself. You have to believe a reality that you've got issues, and that's it can be a hard thing to do. And I'm 0% saying I am or was perfect in any of that.
I mean, you've got issues, but I've got them too.
So give them all to me.
No, give them to you.
It's a great song.
But I want to go a little bit back to what he said to you. That he said you're afraid of her.
Yeah. Because I couldn't open up. I couldn't reveal who I was. I couldn't say what I thought or what I felt because
I was wrong.
Because that was wrong. I had this, someone said this in passing, and then I just was like, oh, that's reality. But the reality was anything I said or did could be used against me in a future and unrelated conversation or situation.
Oh, wow.
And it was, I remember at some point while I was married, I heard that and was like, oh, that's funny. And then I was like,
that's funny,
but it's
that's
also
really
true. And so what that did is it made everything I said very measured. It was a non-answer. It was non-committal. It was a thing that I was just trying really hard not to have come back and haunt me later. And as a result, I had to create all these masks of identity and ways to walls, yeah, and public excuses for her of why she's acting a certain way, this or there, and so it made me afraid to simply be with her because I didn't feel I could. I felt like it was always an opportunity for some kind of future manipulation.
And so how do you cope with that? What did that look like for you staying in the relationship? I know you said that you numbed. I just tried to continue to do the best I could. And I also tried to, I numbed emotionally by learning how to stay unengaged. But one thing that I tried really hard not to do is numb myself through any kind of substance. I was raised very sober. I didn't, because of my upbringing. And I never wanted to fall. I never thought, and I still don't think I have a very addictive personality, but I was like, You're like, just in case.
Just in case. I don't want this to be able to be used against me. I want as much as I can to try to. And like I said, I was messed up in a whole lot of ways that don't have labels, like a personality disorder, just from, whatever. A lot of things that I then had to deal with. So I'm not saying that I was a great angel through this whole thing, but I was aware that there was some ways to deal with it that were way worse than others. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had this. I barely drank ever. But I had this little bottle of Crown, like a little tiny, like a sample bottle.
I think I remember.
I told you this story. Mm-hmm. It probably makes more sense now, but I kept it in my desk, and I kept it as a reminder of like, don't go there, because that could send you both on a spiral.
Yeah.
So for me, I just tried to be as stable and as much of a peacemaker as I could.
And where do you think that comes from?
Within me?
Yeah.
It comes partially for me from not wanting, like I'm very much a peacemaker. I don't want to be in trouble. I don't want to be anyone's problem. I don't want to be in anyone's way. I come from a big family and learned a lot of the way to succeed is to not cause any problems. On the Enneagram, I'm a 9, in case anyone's interested in that.
Do you want to explain what that is?
No.
What the 9 is? What the 9 is, at least? We can do another episode on that.
We could do another episode on the Enneagram. But the 9's the peacemaker, who tries to do everything they can to keep the peace at whoever's expense. And one downside of that is there's a lack of assertion of projecting yourself into whatever that reality is.
Which then also allowed her to take a little bit more of that control and power and assertion in the relationship.
Absolutely.
And kind of create that pattern where you're more being belittled or being told that what you're doing is wrong, and you're just kind of not having a response because you're just kind of like, okay,
right,
I'm just going to push those feelings down right now and not try to cause any more conflict than what you're already creating within us right now.
Because she knew and I knew that if I did push back, that there would be an explosion.
Mm-hmm. So where, has that pattern been, modeled for you anywhere? Does that pattern between two people look familiar at all? How do you think that you knew, or how do you think that you, took on that role within the relationship as opposed to perhaps her role?
I think because it was a natural extension of my personality. For one, it played, that relationship played on the negative aspects of my personality. It played on the fact that my ability and tendency towards being a peacemaker means that I will do a lot to maintain that, and even if it means losing a part of myself. And that was a thing that I not knowingly at that point, but that I gave up. I gave up that opportunity to step into myself and assert it. And once her and her role in the way that she was playing, in the way that she needed security or wanted security and to not be left and all that, and to feel validated. Once she understood that about me, that was a thing that she could then use to keep me right where she wanted me. And I didn't have, maybe as I didn't have the experience or the self-awareness or understanding of myself, or maybe I just didn't have the balls to stand up. But I knew it became a thing. And at some point, when I did, my awareness increased, and I just less and less started, just going along with it. It did get to a place where it was every month, routinely, I would be, threatened to be left. Just pretty intense.
Yeah.
Like,
especially when there is all this pressure around being in the relationship itself, and that, you know, that it's a failure to God and it makes you a failure. That's a lot to take on.
yeah.
A lot of responsibility.
And I took it very, very heavily, and I took it very personally. I took it as like an expression of my character to kind of to stay there. So,
and not having the balls to assert yourself,
yeah,
not having the courage.
That's probably a better way to say that.
I'm just curious, is there a layer of that, being that this is the flip side, and being a male, and I mean, very excited about this. We are going to do an episode about like masculinity and what that looks like and the stereotypes of that. But, you know, just the fact that that's what naturally comes up is like, you know, I didn't have the balls, like, and that implying that you were supposed to have the balls in this scenario. And I don't know.
See, I don't know either. I think that
there's layers to it.
For sure. But I think that has a lot to do with lessons I learned growing up about the same thing, about how in order to keep the peace in a big house, I just learned
that perhaps didn't have anything to do with balls at all, but that balls was just the word to, you know, synonymously with courage.
Yes.
Or strength.
Courage or strength, and kind of self, what's the word I'm looking for? The ability to assert oneself.
And do you think that you found that within that relationship?
No, I don't. I feel like I gave, eventually I had the courage to leave.
And what did that look like? How did you come to that point?
I came to that point because I realized that my awareness of the situation was increasing, and I was becoming very conscious of how down it was making me.
Yeah, that you didn't really, you were like losing sight of who you were. You weren't feeling confident with who you were. You weren't feeling safe.
Right. I was feeling very, very unsafe for a lot of reasons. And it was getting to a place where I was not feeling safe physically either.
Okay.
That it was beginning to cross levels into, you know, past emotional abuse and into potential physical abuse.
And how so? Like, how do you think you were able to recognize that?
There were bursts of anger that began. That there was things thrown that weren't just words. And I also, like, I had a Skype conversation with my parents, and they're pretty. You know, my dad's not one to talk too much. He doesn't get deep into stuff emotionally or any of that. He kind of keeps to his own in that sense. But after that conversation, he sent me an email. It was just like, you could just tell. You could tell I was so beat down by it all that he was like, something's going on. You should look at it. But my awareness of that was increasing, I was also becoming more and more aware of how unaware she was, and how unwilling it seemed at that point she was to take responsibility for any of the things that she was doing or saying, or the ways that she was being. And part of that was because I saw some very particular rejections of, you know, when someone could say, this is what's going on. And I would be like, okay, yeah, I see that. Not because they're trying to be mean, but because this is what's going on. And then to have her categorically deny it and say, no, that's something, or to put it on me and say that it was all my fault, or I'm just projecting something onto her because of my issues. And that she was not to be blamed for any of it.
It doesn't sound like she could take any responsibility for any part that she played in the relationship, or even in that of hurting other people around her.
Right. And it got to a place where I wasn't always a nice guy through all of that, because it was just, I couldn't even think nice things because it was all just so negative. And so I realized that the cards I had to play were becoming much, much more limited. Mm-hmm. And at some point, the only card that I could see to play was to leave. To try to just forge out on my own and deal with the things that I knew I had to deal with that I wasn't given any opportunity to deal with because it was too tumultuous.
And perhaps you didn't have the space
situation.
to.
I didn't have the space to it. Yeah, mm-hmm. It was all the attention needed to kind of be focused one way, mm-hmm. And I realized that I needed space to deal with my things, and because I didn't have it, I chose to leave, because I didn't feel I had any power to make any other changes within it. Mm-hmm. Which I know that there's some could even look and say, and I can even look back and say, well, did I do everything I could? That's I think a question a lot of people ask. Is there something else I can do? Is there another leaf I can overturn? Is there another perspective in order to not just give this whole thing up? Mm-hmm. And what I realized that no matter how many times I could talk my way around it, there was a point where it was more difficult at first. It was going to be worse before it was better.
Yeah.
But I had to take responsibility for myself. And the way I had to do that was by giving myself the space I needed. And that meant giving her the space that she needed, mm-hmm. or potentially, if she chose to use it that way, and leave.
And I think also that how you were saying that you can think over all these different things and say, what else can I do? But also that at a certain point, it's so unrealistic to ask of someone that, like, it's not your responsibility to fix your partner.
Right.
And that is an incredible weight to have to carry. And the fact that you were able to look at that and say, like, there's things within me that I need to look at and I need to allow space for, mm-hmm. and I can't do that in this relationship, and I don't have support to do that in this relationship. And in fact, this relationship is a lot of what's like causing that within me that I need to look at right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And to have that courage to say, this is not for me anymore.
Yeah. Which is that was a big decision. And it's, I don't think it's the correct decision for everybody, mm-hmm. to say, if it's hard, just leave. It was a decision that I took very, very intentionally and with an understanding of the weight of it. But it's also a decision that I made, and I'm very proud of myself for this, that once I made that decision, I stuck to it. Mm-hmm. And I never for a second gave an inch to say that I would be manipulated by it anymore. Mm-hmm. And that took also a lot of strength. And it also took, I had to kind of use some of that numbness that I had learned to be able to just shut it all off and say, it doesn't matter what you say and it doesn't matter what you do. I've made this decision and I'm going to follow through with it.
It's quite assertive of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's quite a lot of balls of you.
That was a lot of balls. It did take a lot of courage. Mm-hmm. It took a lot of It was a good move. Mm-hmm. It was a good move because it allowed me to start playing into my strengths,
mm-hmm.
And
as opposed to bringing out the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like, okay, I'm going to bring out my best, and part of my best is understanding what I choose to allow into my life and what I don't, and what kind of situation I think I deserve to be in, and what kind of situation I think I don't deserve. I don't deserve to be treated this way. Mm-hmm.
Now, last night,
yeah,
you had a very emotional goodbye with someone that was that was a necessary of the relationship, that it was the natural flow of it, that she is leaving the state. And so that there was a knowing not that relationship was coming to an end, but that it allowed you a lot of practice in being present in the relationship. And we reflected a lot on like the things that you've learned from the relationship. This is a very, very beautiful one. And we went through and listed a bunch of things that you realize and that you've learned and that you take away from how you felt in this relationship that you deserve.
That was I'm really glad we had that conversation. It was something that I hadn't necessarily thought so directly about, but then to just with you talk about it and put into words those things, and then also as we have this conversation, realize how much of those are just the opposite of what I thought about myself and about what I claimed that I deserved.
Yeah. And what were you
years ago?
What were you telling yourself that you deserved in that marriage?
Well,
what did you learn you deserved?
In the beginning or in the end, like as
while you're in it,
culminating up to the place where I left, or what kept me in it to begin with.
While you're in it, what that was teaching you about what you deserved in a relationship.
Well, initially going into it, there's a bit of a in my mindset as I was growing up was kind of one of delayed gratification, where if you put up with something now, you'll get a reward later, which in a lot of religions kind of have this in their lifeblood, where if you're good now, you'll have heaven later, and that kind of thinking comes out in a lot of just the day-to-day actions, where you deny now, and then you'll get a reward later. And some of that is, I think it's great, and can be a very fundamental truth, but some of it can push the view of reality and warp it in a way that doesn't allow you to be fully present, because you're always waiting for heaven, whatever that is, to be later. And that's the way it played out there, was if what I deserve is to be, to have a long marriage, because that was my view of success. What I deserve is to have a long marriage that everyone looks at and says is good. But I realize that success isn't those things, and you can have a long marriage that everyone thinks is great and still be completely desolate.
So initially
internally.
You were telling yourself that you deserved a long, successful marriage, and so to have that you were going to have to go through this pain, and that these things were going to exist, because eventually what you did deserve was this long, successful marriage.
Yes. And what I found going into, last night was almost the exact opposite. That what the situation was, that there was someone that was going to leave, whether I liked it or not.
Yeah.
They were going to be here, and then they were going to be gone.
Yeah.
And what that allowed me to do is the exact opposite, and say, I have to invest not in what I think I might deserve later, so I'll have to put up with a bunch of crap now, but
what is the crap that I want now?
I don't know what there is no later.
Yeah.
All I have is now. So all I have to do is say, I deserve to be loved and to love. I deserve to be kind and to be treated fairly and to be treated with respect and adoration. And I deserve to have an opportunity to give that to someone else, not tied to anything else, not tied to tomorrow, tied to just the fact that this is what I have right now, and this is the person that I get to be with, even if it's just for a second. So it's the opposite, almost completely, in my mindset now, than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
And I mean, how does that impact you today? I mean, is this the first relationship now, 15-ish years later, that you're looking at and saying, yeah, I do deserve to be kind to. I do deserve to be understood. I deserve to be respected. That those things are really showing through.
It's maybe not the first time I've thought those things, but it is a very prime example of that manifesting into life. In that sense, in the sense that it was with a girl or with some kind of romantic connection. But I've also, in the beauty of this thinking, the beauty of it is that I've also seen that in all these other areas of my life, whether it just be friendship. When I look at someone like you, and I'm like, no, I deserve to have a friend who understands me and who does make sacrifices for me, and that I can make sacrifices for and give to and not feel manipulated or taken advantage of. That and then I think that with my career, where it's not a thing where if I do this thing, then I'm going to have something else. Where I have a thing, I have the ability to sing and make a living, and it's such a happy, beautiful thing. It's not waiting for anything else. What I deserve is to have the life that I want here and now. And however simple that is, but the way I look at it is acting out and manifesting. It's just kind of a weird word, but like bringing into life that reality that it's not all. The delayed gratification is a thing, but also understanding what you deserve and living it.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of courage, a lot of balls to do.
It does. It does. But it also takes a lot of internal work. It takes a lot of knowing what is it you want.
It's developing that relationship with yourself first, because also how you treat yourself is how you're letting other people know how to treat you.
Yes.
So
yes, and that is the other incredible. Like when you can know something in your head, and then like even you can hear it and you can read it on Instagram or hear it in a lecture or a great self-help book, and you can understand it in your brain. But there's a different place where you understand it in your in the way that you're actually living.
Yeah.
And that has to do with awareness of self.
You gotta have that emotional intelligence. But did you ever talk to other guys? Like, were there friends in your life or in your life now that you've been able to like share this experience with and like have them relate to in some way? Like, have you been able to open up with another man about the abuse within that relationship and how that impacted you?
I haven't really talked about it much. This conversation with you is really the thorough go through of the whole thing that I've had. I know that while I was in it, I had a very close pastor friend that that I was able to be very open with about it, and he was able to kind of see through.
Yeah. So you were able to kind of talk through it while in it.
And then afterwards as well. But there was a point where, especially right afterwards, it's all so fresh. You
need space from it.
Talking about that, and also I would end up in these places where I'm just you're talking and it's easy to get in where you're blaming, or you're like, oh, this was and it's not. I mean, even now I talk about it now, there were some parts of it that were awful. But I hope I'm not making it sound like it was all just, because she's I want to be conscious with the way that I'm presenting it, so that I'm taking responsibility for what I have to take responsibility for, and not trying to just put it all on her. Good.
You have.
But yeah, when it was really fresh, it was really easy to fall in those traps of of blame or accusation or of, whatever, of speaking from a place of hurt because the hurt was still so fresh.
Yeah. And that's okay to also even now to speak from that place of hurt. And that doesn't mean that you're putting the blame on her. It's a package.
Probably.
I don't think it's anyone. I'm not expecting anyone to be coming. So maybe I need to grab the package from the person.
Maybe. Is that the people that bought the house?
Yes, and they already got us a different gift here. And the night that we went over offers, they sent champagne and a whole, my goodness.
Laying it on thick. Where were we?
Because I think in that sense, in you wanting to make sure that you're also taking responsibility for yourself, which you very much have, that you're also in a way trying to protect her and take responsibility for the ways that she was actually acting out and hurting you, and the ways that, she was perhaps suffering from her own mental health difficulties that, I still hear that in you now, even when you say that, when you say well, I want to make sure, I'm not putting the blame on her and not, and I think part of that is just because that is part of your caring personality, but also kind of speaks to the level of manipulation that she was able to exert over you.
Yeah. And part of it too is I saw her in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. We signed the papers, and then she walked to the elevator and I walked to the stairs, and I haven't seen her since. So there is this sense of I don't know where she is or how she's doing or what she's doing. And I don't want to, if someone does know her, I hope she's doing well. That's part of it too.
Yeah. Some feelings there?
No, surprisingly.
Okay.
It's thoughts. I think I hope, but I haven't opened up the feeling part of it.
Still some walls around that.
I hope that I've been able to take down those walls and experience them experience that the life that I want with other people. Mm-hmm. I think I'm too far removed from it to try to feel feelings about it. Mm-hmm. Now. I think those feelings have and or will continue to process through interactions with other people when I'll get opportunities and have had opportunities to deal with the things that I need to deal with, and but also experience the joys that I want to experience and deserve to experience, unassociated with any other baggage.
Yeah.
Of what it was like to be within that relationship.
As we wrap up, I want to know if there's anything that you want specifically to share with people, perhaps other men who are in abusive relationships currently, or even to women who are in abusive relationships right now, of what you would say to them or what you would say to yourself back then.
What I would say is I think there are some really important questions to ask. And I think those questions, again, it's really easy to get caught in the, I guess you'd say, surface level of things. Mm-hmm. Whatever argument of the day, or whatever issue of the moment. And they can become very prevalent in the mind, and the mind chatter can just be like running a million miles a minute. So the first thing I would say is to take some time to take a step back. If you feel like there's a lot going on there, take a step back. And then, for a minute, like, yes, you want to be very, very clear about what the reality is of the situation. And if there's something going on that is outside of your control, that was one thing that I did need to hear at some point. And it was the pastor friend that we had just gone through a counseling session with him, and he was like, there may be something here that's, out of your control. It may not be all your fault, is what he told me.
It does take two.
Yeah. Well, and then that allowed me at least the opportunity to begin to zoom out and say, what is really going on here? So what I would say is, first, zoom out, take a minute, get out of the mind chatter and try to zoom out. Second thing I would say is be very, very, very careful about those, the cycles that lead to isolation, because we lose perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we get isolated from our family, we get isolated from our friends, we get isolated from our communities, we get isolated from our ability to ask questions, from our ability to say, this is going on. What I found was that there was a reality that needed to be maintained, and to question that reality was always frowned upon. And the best way to create and maintain that reality was to maintain a sense of isolation from the external world, so that none of those things could be brought to light. So after you zoom back, I would make sure that you've got some perspective. And if you make an attempt to unisolate yourself and to go to therapy, or to bring a friend into the situation, or talk to a pastor, or whatever that is, and your significant other rejects it, retaliates against it, pushes back on it really, really hard, I see that as a very, very bright red flag. That leads nowhere good. That isolation leads nowhere good. The second thing I would say is to remember to always be kind through it all, because the reality is when someone does have any kind of, we're all dealing with stuff, and some people are dealing with some really, really heavy things from their childhood, and pain bodies that literally can take control. And
that, it sounds like, to have some compassion with that. Like, I hear that from you, that you very much have a certain understanding of where she was at. And it doesn't sound like you even give blame to that, but that you're able to, like, compassionately sit with that and understand where she was coming from.
Because I know enough about her life and what she went through when she was younger that contributed to maybe her developing this this condition. But also the more perspective, even in time that I have, the more it really feels like so much of it was out of her control. She wasn't trying to manipulate me. She wasn't trying to be abusive. She was trying to feel safe and secure. And the only way she knew that was to create this reality. And then I was a part of that reality. And so I had to be controlled. And
that's great perspective to have.
Yeah. But then also learning to be kind within that. And then the other thing I would say is to learn how to be truthful. Learn how to be truthful with yourself of where you are, what your reality is, and then also learning to be true to yourself of who am I? What do I want? What do I deserve? Is this something that that is going to contribute to my growth? And how? Because it's always an opportunity to contribute to your growth, and sometimes it's by working through it, by diving straight into it, and sometimes it's by saying, I don't have anything else to give here. I've reached the bottom of this barrel. There's no more energy, and there's no more love to give. There's no more life. I have to be truthful with myself and say that whatever this is becoming cancerous and spreading, and there's a toxicity to it that is that I have to find a way to deal with, either by confronting it or in some cases by actually just saying, you know what, I need to get out of it.
Yeah.
I need to step away.
It's okay to walk away.
It's okay to walk away. Very, very, very okay. And that doesn't mean all the problems are going to go away, because you walk away.
You are a part of it as well. And that's also going to follow you afterwards, and to take some time.
And the things you have to deal with, you still got to deal with. Leaving them doesn't make all those things go away. But if the reality is that there's no space there for you to be able to do that, and if attempts towards growth and attempts towards truth and attempts towards community and lack of isolation are being pushed against, and they say, no, this is untruthful. You are not this way. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve to. Others can't be included in this because they may tell me something I don't want to hear. Those kinds of things, I think, are very significant red flags.
Yeah. I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
It's a good reflection to have had, and I think is like very helpful step-by-step things for people to take away.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think would be super powerful as a takeaway from this episode, really like kind of the exercise that we did last night verbally, but doing that in a tangible way of writing that stuff down, of literally writing down the things that like you learned you deserved by being in that abusive relationship, the things that you were told about yourself, and then separately writing down the things that you do deserve and the things that perhaps you've reflected on after the abusive relationship, or that you wish for the future, or that you take some time and look at yourself and say, you know what, these actually are the things that I deserve. And writing those things down, literally just, I deserve blank. I deserve blank. I deserve blank. Like at least 5 things, jot those down and take a few minutes to sit with those things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not a selfish thing.
No.
There's a part of me that even last night I felt a little bit of, not resistance to, but like that little part of me was like, oh, can I really say that? Can I say that I deserve to be adored? Yes. Yes, I can.
And I know there's like, for me, I have a certain thing with the word deserve, and like Louis C.K. does a bit on it where it's like deserve, like no one deserves anything. Like no one deserves, like you're not entitled to anything. You don't deserve anything. But I also look at that as like deserve, when you say you deserve something, that it's a line that you're drawing with saying that you will take nothing less than this, and that this is something that you want, and that you believe you are worth.
Yeah.
That maybe it's not I deserve this, but it's I am worth respect.
Right.
I am worth adoration. Adoration. I don't know how you say that. Adoration. Yeah. Being adored.
Being adored.
I am worth being adored.
Well, that's like the word deserve. If we're not careful, we can say we deserve something that means we're owed it and someone else owes us.
Yes, exactly.
So I think the important distinction there is to start with, I deserve it.
Because I'm worth it.
Because I'm worth it, and I deserve first and foremost to give it to myself.
Yes.
And then if I can adore myself, and I'm like, oh, I deserve that, then it's a no. It's a non-issue.
And it's a standard that you're setting for yourself.
Yeah, when someone else comes along, they treat you a certain way, and you say, I treat myself better than that. I'd rather be by myself. And then someone comes along and says, here, you've treated yourself really well. Here's some more. And then you're able to just accept it and to be with it in a way that can not be even attached to anything else. It can just be a thing that allows, heaven on earth. It allows you to be in the reality that you want to be in a really cool way.
Yeah. I think it has been a real, a process that I'm very thankful for, and that feels very much to be a privilege to observe and be a part of your journey to realizing, and maybe you've realized these things before, but of really identifying these things as you go through these different relationships, and that took a lot of courage and vulnerability and openness on your part, especially last night, to reflect on those things that you deserve in a relationship and that you are really going to strive for, and not take that shit that you've taken in the past, but to like assert yourself and not take anything less than what you would give yourself. I think that's super powerful. And I think to allow yourself the space for those feelings and to be emotional in that way, I think is really powerful. And especially for men, I wouldn't want you to be in any relationship with someone who wouldn't allow the space for that, with respect.
Yeah.
And kindness.
And kindness. I was just about to say, and kindness, which is an easy thing to overlook, but that can be the most important thing is, can there be a level of kindness that continues to be present? And if that gets threatened, that to me is an indicator of some kind of imbalance. It's like, pay attention. Once you take away kindness, you take away a lot of opportunity. So thank you for giving me this space to share this all, which I'm really, so it's this may be revealing too much about you, but you've mentioned that it's like often you do a podcast and you have like your pits that don't normally sweat. I just got a whiff of like a thing. I don't smell this. I'm not used to this. I got a little whiff of the stress pit, and I'm like, know how you feel. So this is, of course, a vulnerable place, but a space that I'm very happy to have been able to share with you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. The sweaty pit, is just another step on the path of vulnerability. That shows real strength. The stress odor, that's how you know you're doing the work.
I don't know how scientific that is, but we've been doing some unofficial experiments, and we're on track to this being a good indicator.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on as a guest this time and like sharing your personal story. If you guys want to keep up with Kitt, you can follow him at Kitt Bender on Instagram, and that is with
2 T's.
2 T's. Kitt Bender. And he has a website, kittbender.com. You can check out his music on there. If you guys are in Seattle, you can see him at Keys on Main, doing some awesome singing and piano playing. I don't think there's any sweaty odor there. At least not like
it's a sweaty odor, but it's not a stress odor. It's a different kind of sweaty. It's more of the lights and.
He'll smell much better for you guys than he does for me right now. Yeah. But you guys can also keep sending us letters at ask.letstalkaboutit@gmail.com. And you can find the pod on Instagram at letstalkaboutit_podcast. So thanks for tuning in to another episode.
Yeah, would love to hear your reaction of how this.
Yeah, leave us reviews on iTunes.
Leave us reviews on iTunes.
What I would love, actually, is to read your guys' lists. If anyone is still listening past that outro right now, this should have been inserted earlier, but to write your list of what you deserve in a review.
Yeah, the 5 things that you deserve.
Yeah,
and then give yourself those things. Don't expect them or. From anybody else until
give yourself those things.
Think of those things. Use your relationships as ways to like remind you of sometimes this happened and I don't deserve to be treated that way. And then say, okay, well, how do I deserve to be treated?
Yes.
Live that way. Yes. And write it in an iTunes review. Okay, that's all.
That's all. We'll talk about it next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Wave Podcast Network. Check out all of our shows, including the Brain Candy Podcast, I Don't Get It, Babes and Babies, Coffee Convos, and Let's Talk About It.